The first thing Helena Voss saw was the rust. Not the man behind the wheel. Not the 9-year-old boy beside him, holding a small chrome lug nut keychain like it was a promise. Not the work order folded on the dashboard that said emergency tow support. Approved by Event Logistics. Just the rust. The 1,978 red tow truck rolled through the service gate of the Voss Heritage Invitational with faded paint. Cracked amber roof lights. A dented tow bed. And a hook assembly old enough to have its own regrets. It moved slowly past a line of polished collector cars that gleamed under white tents, each one guarded by ropes, placards, and men wearing sunglasses more expensive than Mason Cole's monthly shop payment. Mason kept both hands on the wheel and listened to the old truck's tired rhythm. It had a rough idle, a patched bench seat, and a heater that smelled like dust and old oil. But it ran. That was more than his regular tow rig had done the week before when the transmission gave out behind a closed gas station at midnight. Mason was 39, owner of Cole Roadside and Repair, and the kind of single father who measured good luck by whether the lights stayed on and whether his son made it to school with clean shoes. Beside him, Owen Cole sat straight in the passenger seat, his fingers wrapped around the chrome lug nut keychain from Mason's old truck. Grace had bought it years ago at a roadside swap meet, before illness turned their house into a place where everyone learned to whisper. Owen carried it when he wanted to feel brave. The Voss Heritage Invitational was not built for men like Mason. It was built for people who spoke about cars as assets, legacies, and acquisition. White tents covered rare machines with mirrors under their frames. Staff moved with tablets and soft voices. Security guards watched the service lane as if poverty might scratch the paint. Mason had been hired as backup tow support through Lydia Park, the event logistics manager. After another recovery company canceled, he was not there to compete, mingle, or ask anyone for respect. He was there because he needed the check and because the rusted red tow truck, bought from a farm estate sale for $1,200, was the only thing he had that could still pull weight. Helena Voss stood near the central display tent when the tow truck arrived. She was 43, billionaire collector dealer, owner of Voss Classic and Performance, and host of the event. Everyone in the region wanted to be seen attending. Her dark suit looked made for the angle of camera flashes. Her smile looked made for people who had never missed a payment in their lives. She turned when the tow truck rattled behind the tents, and her face changed as if someone had dragged a trash bin into a museum. "What is that doing here?" she asked, loud enough for guests to hear. A few heads turned, then more. The truck coughed once and settled near the service edge of the lot. Mason stepped down first, then helped Owen down from the passenger side. Owen stayed close, the lug nut keychain hidden halfway in his fist. Mason took the folded work order from the dashboard and approached the nearest event staffer. Before he could speak, Helena walked toward him with 2 assistants and a cluster of collector guests behind her. "Please tell me," she said, looking from Mason to the tow truck. "That thing is not part of my event." Someone laughed softly. Mason held out the work order. Emergency tow support. Lydia Park approved the service entry. Helena did not take the paper. She looked at the truck again. "That is not tow support. That is a tetanus shot on wheels." The laugh that followed was bigger this time. It moved through the nearest guests, then through 2 young staff members who immediately looked ashamed of themselves. Owen stared at the ground. Mason felt the laugh land on his son before it landed on him. That was the worst part. He could take an insult. He had taken plenty. People talk differently to a man in worn boots standing beside a rusted truck. But when a child hears strangers turn his father into a joke, something inside the father has to hold still with both hands. Mason folded the work order once. "I'm here to do a job," he said. "If one of these cars needs moving, I can move it without scratching it." Helena smiled as if he had just made the joke better. "With that, I would rather push it myself." Owen looked up at Mason. and the question in his eyes was too old for 9. Why did she laugh before she even looked? Mason did not answer yet. He only put one hand lightly on Owen's shoulder. A photographer near the central tent raised a camera, then lowered it when Helena gave him a look. She turned to her assistants. "Keep this truck away from the main lawn. I do not want it in the background of any press photos." Then she faced Mason again. "Park it behind the maintenance trailers. Better yet, park it across the road." Mason's eyes moved past her shoulder to the tow bed. He had noticed something when he stepped down. Something he had not seen clearly in the farmyard where he bought the truck. The bed sat too high. If you have ever seen someone judge a man by rust, or a father by what he could afford, stay with this story. Tell me where you are listening from. Because that old tow truck was not just ugly metal. Under its false bed was something Helena Voss had invited a racing legend to celebrate without knowing it had been sitting in front of her the whole time. Mason moved the truck to the service edge because he was not there to start a fight. The old tires crunched over gravel near the maintenance trailers. Away from the collector tents and the champagne tables, Helena watched until it was out of the main sightline, then returned to smiling for guests near a silver race car display. Owen climbed onto the running board and looked at his father. "Dad," he said quietly. Why did she say that? Mason opened the side toolbox mounted behind the cab, though he was not looking for tools. Because she thinks rust is the whole story. Owen rubbed the chrome lug nut between his fingers. "Is it?" Mason looked at the tow bed again. "No. Rust only tells you where something has been, not what it still carries." The words came out before Mason could stop them, and Grace's voice followed them in his memory. She had said almost the same thing years ago while he was trying to throw away an old bench vise with a cracked handle. Rust only tells you where something has been, not what it still carries. Grace had believed broken things deserved one honest look before anyone gave up on them. Mason had tried to live that way after she died, though some days he felt like the broken thing being kept alive by habit. He put on a pair of work gloves and crouched beside the tow bed. Owen crouched beside him, careful not to get in the way. The first clue was height. The diamond plate floor of the bed sat almost 2 inches higher than it should have for that model of old recovery truck. Most people would never notice. But Mason had crawled under enough tow rigs to know when a bed had been modified after the factory. The second clue was the bolt pattern. Heavy underbed bolts ran in a rectangle that did not match the hoist frame. They were older than recent repairs, but not original to the truck. The third clue came when Mason leaned close to a seam near the left side of the bed. Beneath the smell of rust, fuel, and sun-baked rubber, there was something else. Preservation oil. Old. Sealed. Faint. But real. He stopped moving. Owen noticed. "Bad?" the boy asked. Mason shook his head slowly. "Interesting." He took out his phone and photographed the bed, the bolts, the seam, and the underside before touching anything. He had learned that from years of recovery work at small race events, where the expensive parts were not always the cleanest ones, and the important evidence was often under dirt. Men with money liked shiny cars. Men who moved them learned to look at brackets, straps, tie-down points, belts, and whatever had been hidden so it would not shift in transit. This tow truck had not only been used to haul cars. At some point in its life, someone had built part of it to carry something inside itself. A golf cart rolled up behind them. Lydia Park stepped out, holding a tablet against her hip. She was 35. Practical, tired, and already wearing the expression of a person trying to keep a rich event from becoming a disaster. "Mason," she said quietly. "I'm sorry about that. Your access is valid. I have you listed as emergency support through 6. Mason stood. "I appreciate it." Lydia glanced at the truck, then toward the main tent. "Just keep it back here for now. Helena is sensitive about optics." Owen looked at her. "Optics means she doesn't want people to see us." Lydia's mouth opened, then closed. Mason looked down at his son. It means some people care more about the picture than the work. Lydia winced a little, because the line was too true to argue with. Mason returned to the seam after Lydia left. He tapped the diamond plate with the handle of a screwdriver. Solid at the rear. Hollow near the left middle. Dense again near the winch support. The sound changed like a secret answering in pieces. Owen held a flashlight, though it was midday, because Mason asked him to keep the beam on the seam under the bed lip. "Do we need to fix it?" Owen asked. Mason found a hidden access bolt under a smear of old paint. "Not yet." "Then what are we doing?" Mason looked toward the central tent, where guests admired a line of rare racing cars connected to the old Falcon program. "We're listening." He loosened only one cover strip, then another, taking photos between each step. He did not pry hard. He did not force rusted metal to tell the truth before it was ready. When the access panel shifted a quarter inch, a stronger breath of preservation oil came out, mixed with the dry mineral smell of old desiccant. Mason froze. He had smelled that before in sealed engine crates at a vintage race transporter job outside Toledo. Oil wrap. Aged foam. Metal kept sleeping for years. He looked at Owen. "Step back a little." Owen did, but his eyes stayed fixed on the opening. Mason eased the panel wider, just enough to see into the hidden space beneath the tow bed. At first, there was only shadow. Then the edge of a crate appeared under the bed, dark and rectangular, secured by old brackets that locked into the truck's frame. It was not random junk. It was not a fuel tank, not a tool drawer, not a farmer's homemade storage box. It was a transport crate. Mason reached in with the flashlight and angled it across the surface. Old wrap. A sealed corner. A partial stencil almost black with age. Tolver. He swallowed. The beam moved lower. Danner. Then, beneath it, half covered by dust and a strip of oilcloth. "Adri," Owen whispered. "What does that mean?" Mason did not answer right away. He knew what F-12R might mean. Everyone at the event knew Falcon V-12R because Helena had built half the Invitational around that history. It was a canceled racing program from the early 90s, famous for one championship season, one legendary driver, and one engine that disappeared during the team shutdown before the final exhibition race. Ray Danner had driven that car. Ray Danner was somewhere on the property right now, invited by Helena to bring credibility to her collector negotiations. Mason looked again at the stamp. For Tolver, Danner. E. Trey. His hands felt suddenly too large for the small opening. Before he could close the panel, Helena's voice cut across the service lane. "Why is that still open?" She came toward them with 2 staff members and a man in a gray blazer, her expression sharpened by irritation. "Mr. Cole, I told you to keep this truck out of the event. I did not invite you to disassemble it on my property." Mason stood slowly, placing himself between Helena and the open panel. "I'm inspecting my truck." Helena's eyes flicked to the gap in the bed. "Your truck is a safety hazard. If it leaks anything on this property, you will be responsible." Mason nodded once. "Then, I'll keep it contained." Helena looked at Owen, then back at Mason. "Or you can take $500 and haul it away before you embarrass yourself further." Owen's face tightened. $500. Less than Mason had paid. Less than the old truck was worth even as scrap. Mason's jaw moved, but his voice stayed even. "No." Helena blinked. "Excuse me, no. Thank you." The staff behind her exchanged glances. Helena did not like being refused, especially by someone she had already placed beneath her. "Do you understand where you are?" she asked. Mason looked toward the rare cars under the tents, then back at his rusted tow truck. "Yes." "Then act like it." Mason held her gaze. "I am." That was when Ray Danner walked past the service lane. He was not supposed to be part of the moment. He was supposed to be on the main lawn in 15 minutes for a conversation about legacy, competition, and the glory of machines rich people had polished after other men risked their lives in them. Ray was 68, silver-haired, broad-shouldered despite age. With the quiet limp of someone who had survived crashes he did not like discussing, he slowed when he smelled the preservation oil. Then he stopped completely when he saw the open strip in the tow bed and the old crate corner beneath it. Helena turned, surprised. "Ray, we are just handling a service issue." Ray did not seem to hear her. His eyes were on the hidden compartment. Mason saw the man's face change before anyone else did. It was not excitement. It was recognition mixed with pain. Ray took 2 steps closer. "Who opened that?" he asked. Mason lifted one hand slightly. "I did. It's my truck." Ray looked at him for the first time. Then at the truck. Then at the partial stencil. "Where did you get it?" Helena laughed lightly, trying to take the air back. "At a farm sale. Apparently. It is nothing. An old recovery truck with some farm modification." Ray lowered himself carefully to one knee beside the bed. "No," he said. "That is not farm work." The service lane went quiet. Not the whole event yet. But enough people nearby sensed something had shifted and stopped pretending not to watch. Ray leaned closer without touching the crate. "Do not move that panel," he said. Mason nodded. "I haven't moved the crate." Ray looked at him sharply. An approval flickered across his face. "Good." Helena's smile was gone now. "Ray, please. We have guests waiting." Ray ignored her. "Do you have a flashlight?" Owen stepped forward before Mason could answer and held out the small flashlight with both hands. Ray looked at the boy, then accepted it gently. "Thank you." He angled the light into the compartment. The letters became clearer. F12. Danner. Edri. Ray's hand tightened around the flashlight. But he still did not touch the crate. For a long moment, the retired racing legend said nothing. Helena looked from him to the truck. And for the first time that morning, she looked at the rust as if it might be hiding a weapon. Ray stood slowly. His voice, when it came, was quiet enough that people leaned in to hear it. "Nobody touches this truck." Helena stiffened. "Ray." He turned to her then. And the man who had been polite all morning disappeared behind the eyes of someone who had lost something 30 years ago. "I mean it." Mason felt Owen move closer to his side. The boy's fingers found his father's sleeve. Around them, staff members, 2 collectors, and Lydia Park had gathered near the service lane. Helena saw the audience forming and tried to smile again. But it would not stay on her face. "Let's not dramatize a rusty service vehicle," she said. Ray looked back at the hidden compartment. "That stencil says F12R. Danner. Adri." The last part came out slower. "If that is real, it belongs to a piece of history that vanished before most of these people knew what they were collecting." Mason felt the words settle over the truck like a tarp being pulled away. Helena stepped closer to the opening. Mason shifted just enough to block her path. He did not touch her. He did not raise his voice. He simply stood between the billionaire and the rusted truck she had called trash. "Mr. Cole," she said coldly, "you are interfering with event operations." Lydia Park spoke before Mason could. "His entry is valid. He is listed as emergency tow support. The truck is on the service edge, not the main lawn." Helena turned on her. Lydia looked pale. But she did not take the words back. Ray lifted one hand. "This is not an event optics issue anymore." The first true silence came then. The central tent was still humming in the distance. But around the service lane, nobody laughed. The same truck that had been mocked as a tetanus shot on wheels now had a racing legend standing guard beside it. Owen looked up at Mason. Eyes wide with confusion and pride tangled together. "Dad," he whispered. "Is it important?" Mason looked at the rusted bed, the hidden crate, the partial stamp, and Ray Danner's face. "I think it carried something important," he said. Ray heard him and nodded once. "More than important." Helena folded her arms, but her voice had lost some of its sharpness. "What exactly are you suggesting is inside?" Ray did not look at her. He looked at Mason. "I am suggesting we document this properly, with witnesses, before anyone with a financial interest gets close enough to rewrite the story." The line hit Helena directly, and everyone knew it. Mason looked down at Owen's chrome lugnut keychain, catching light in his son's hand. He thought of Grace, of old things, of rust and what it still carries. He had arrived that morning as the embarrassing tow guy Helena wanted hidden from photographs. Now the most famous man at her event was watching his truck like it was a locked vault. Ray stepped back from the open panel and addressed everyone near the service lane. "If that stamp says what I think it says," he said, "nobody touches this truck until we document it." Then he looked at Mason, not Helena. When he asked the question that turned the entire day in a new direction, "Mr. Cole, do you have proof this truck is yours?" Mason reached into his back pocket and pulled out the folded bill of sale from the farm estate. The paper was wrinkled, plain, and worth more in that moment than any invitation at the event. Helena stared at it. Ray nodded. "Good," he said. "Because if that is the E3 engine, you did not bring junk to this show. You brought back the one thing I never stopped looking for." Ray Danner's words changed the temperature around the service lane. A few minutes earlier, the rusted red tow truck had been something Helena Voss wanted hidden from photographs. Now it stood behind the maintenance trailers like a locked safe, with a racing legend guarding it and half the event trying not to stare. Mason Cole held the folded bill of sale in one hand and kept the other on Owen's shoulder. His son stood close, chrome lugnut keychain clenched in his fist, eyes moving between his father, Ray, Helena, and the small opening under the tow bed where the old stencil had been seen. Mason could feel the boy trying to understand how a thing could be worthless one moment and untouchable the next. Helena recovered first because that was what she was trained to do. She stepped closer, adjusted the cuff of her dark suit, and lowered her voice as if privacy could still be created by pretending, "Mr. Cole, let us handle this properly. We have a hospitality trailer with controlled lighting, security, and recording equipment. Move the truck there and we can avoid confusion." Mason looked toward the trailer she indicated, then back at Ray. He knew what controlled meant when a person like Helena said it. It meant her staff, her cameras, her timing, her version of whatever was found. Mason shook his head. "The truck stays where it is." Helena's eyes hardened. "This is my event." Mason held up the bill of sale. "And this is my truck." That simple sentence made several people look down at the ground. Helena smiled without warmth. "A truck you bought for what?" $1,000, $1,200. Mason said. "From a farm estate sale. Paid in full." Helena gave a small sigh, as if tired of explaining the world to a child. "Fine. I will pay you $25,000 for it right now. Cashier's check before sunset. You can take your son home, fix whatever little shop you run, and avoid getting pulled into something you do not understand." Owen looked up sharply at the mention of the shop. Mason felt it. The temptation. 2 months of lease pressure. A transmission bill waiting. School expenses. A father does not hear $25,000 as a number. He hears breathing room, but he also heard the way Helena said little shop. Mason folded the bill of sale again and put it back in his pocket. "No." Helena blinked once. "You should think carefully." Mason looked at the hidden panel. "I am..." Ray Danner's mouth moved into the smallest hint of a smile. Not because he enjoyed the conflict, but because he recognized a man holding his ground without making a performance of it. Lydia Park stepped forward with her tablet. "For the record," she said, voice shaking but clear. "Mr. Cole is listed in the event service log as emergency tow support. The truck entered through the approved service gate at 8:12 this morning. There is no removal order in the safety file." Helena turned slowly. "Lydia, this is not the time." Lydia swallowed. "It is exactly the time if people are going to start saying he had no right to be here." The second silence was smaller. But it mattered. Mason had not expected help from anyone at the event. And Lydia had just risked her job for a fact. Ray nodded to her. "Good. Then we document here. No private trailer. No move truck. No opened crate without witnesses." Helena looked toward the main tent, where guests had begun drifting toward the service lane in clusters. The story was moving faster than she could contain. One of her assistants whispered that the museum representative had been called. Helena gave him a look that made him stop talking. Then she turned back to Ray. "If we do this here, we do it professionally," Ray said. That was always the plan. They set up a controlled inspection beside the service lane with more care than the rusted truck had ever received in its life. Lydia recorded the time and the location. Ray asked 2 neutral event officials to stand where they could see the panel. Mason opened only what Ray told him to open. Owen stood a few steps back beside Lydia, holding the lug nut keychain against his chest like a medal he had not yet earned. Helena remained close enough to watch. But every time she leaned toward the compartment, Mason shifted slightly, not blocking the view, only protecting the space. He did not trust the hunger in her eyes. Ray put on gloves before touching the edge of the access panel. "This bed was modified by someone who knew race transport," he said. "See the raised floor, the support points are not random. This was built to hold weight without letting the load shift under acceleration." Helena exhaled sharply. "It is an old hidden box." Ray did not look at her. "No, it is a transport cavity." He pointed toward the old wrap visible around the crate. "And that is not farmer's storage. That is preservation wrap. I last saw that pattern in the Falcon support shop before the program shut down." Mason watched Ray's face while he spoke. The man was not performing for guests. He was walking into a memory. When the panel came wider, the full crate edge emerged from shadow. The stencil was still partly covered by dust, but Ray would not let anyone wipe it aggressively. He used a soft cloth and a breath of patience. F12R became clear. Then Danner. Then Edrai. Ray stepped back as if the letters had pushed him. His hand trembled once before he closed it into a fist. "That is the engine designation," he said. His voice had lost its public event polish. E3 was the 3rd development engine. It was the one we used in the final championship test. It vanished during the shutdown in 1994. A collector behind Helena whispered something, then stopped when Ray turned his head. Helena tried again. "Ray, memories can be unreliable after 30 years. This time," Ray looked directly at her. "Not that one." He pointed to the crate's side bracket. Falcon had 3 crate patterns. E1 and E2 were stored in square frames. E3 had offset mounts because we cracked an intake flange moving it after a test at Briar Ridge. I argued with Frank Mercer for 2 hours about that frame. He looked at Lydia. "Can someone call Frank? He is in the old crew hospitality area." Unless Helena forgot to invite the mechanics again. The line was quiet. But it cut. Helena's face tightened. Frank Mercer arrived 10 minutes later in a faded racing jacket that looked out of place among the tailored blazers. He was 57, thick-handed, sunburned at the neck, and slow to trust the gathering around Mason's truck. He leaned under the tow bed with Ray beside him, studied the crate mounts, then put one hand over his mouth. "I built that offset brace," he said. Helena's assistant started to speak. But Frank kept going. "We needed a way to move E3 after the last test. The team was collapsing. Bills everywhere. Lawyers in the office. Somebody said the engine was going to storage. Then it was gone. Ray looked at him. Did we ever use a tow truck transport? Frank nodded slowly. Red recovery truck. Old even then. We used it because nobody would look twice at it. Mason looked at the rusted truck and felt the story inside it grow heavier. It had not just carried an engine. It had carried fear, shutdown, secrecy, and 30 years of unanswered questions. Owen leaned close to Lydia and whispered. So it was hiding, Lydia answered softly. Maybe it was protecting something. Mason heard her and felt the words settle in him. Some machines are not beautiful because of what they show. Some matter because of what they kept safe. A museum representative arrived from the main tent while Ray and Frank reviewed the crate. Her name was Elise Marlowe, Director of Acquisitions for a racing museum consortium that had been negotiating with Helena for exclusive rights to a Danner Falcon archive exhibit. She was calm, serious, and careful with her questions. She did not ask what the engine was worth first. She asked who owned the truck, who opened the compartment, whether the crate had been moved, and who witnessed the discovery. Mason answered each question plainly. Lydia confirmed the service log. Ray confirmed he had stopped the inspection before the crate was disturbed. Frank confirmed the transport hardware. Helena stood beside them, more silent with every answer. Elise looked at Mason. Do you consent to full visual authentication of the crate without removing the engine from its preservation cradle? Mason looked at Ray. Then at Owen. As long as it stays documented and nobody moves it without my permission? Elise nodded. That is reasonable. Helena's voice sharpened. The engine, if authentic, is part of Falcon history connected to my event and my archive negotiation. Elise turned to her. Connected. Yes. Owned by you. Not established. Helena's face went still. Ray added. The man owns the truck. The engine was inside the truck. Until a court says otherwise. You do not get to talk like he is standing next to your property. The full crate stencil was revealed under witness, and the service lane became a courtroom without walls. Falcon vdodicir. Edri. Danner test. A faded seal remained on one side. Brittle but intact. Ray did not touch it for almost a minute. When he finally did, it was with the reverence of a man touching an old wound. That is not just an engine, he said. That is the one we lost before the final race. The crowd had grown now. The white tents seemed far away. The polished collector cars were still there. Still beautiful. But nobody was looking at them. They were looking at the rusted tow truck Helena had wanted across the road. Elise closed her folder and spoke carefully. Ms. Voss. Our consortium will pause the exclusive Danner archive negotiation until ownership and provenance are reviewed independently. Helena turned fast. That is unnecessary. Elise did not flinch. It became necessary when the most important discovery at your event was nearly removed as an eyesore. Several guests heard it. A few looked away because they did not want to be seen agreeing. Helena's event, built to display her taste and control, had become the place where she publicly failed to recognize the most valuable artifact on the property. Mason felt no joy in that. He felt only the strange quiet that comes when truth finally stands up by itself. Then Ray did something Mason did not expect. He stepped away from the crate and faced the crowd. This man did what collectors are supposed to do, he said. He looked closer. He did not pry it open. He did not sell it fast. He documented it and protected it. He turned toward Mason and Owen. The man you laughed at brought back the engine I spent 30 years looking for. The final silence came then. It rolled through the service lane, over the white tents, past Helena's assistants, past the guests who had laughed, and settled around Owen like a blanket. The boy looked at his father, and Mason saw something change in his face. Not excitement about money. Not even pride. Relief. His father had not been small after all. Helena did not apologize immediately. Pride rarely dies on command. But she did step back. And for the first time that day, nobody moved aside to make room for her. Elise asked Mason if he would consider a formal preservation offer pending legal review. Mason said he would listen. With Ray, Lydia, and an attorney present. That answer seemed to surprise some people. They expected a poor man to grab at the first big number thrown at him. Mason had been poor long enough to know that a big number without clean terms could become another way to lose. By evening, Elise had placed a written preliminary offer of $3.6 million for the preserved Falcon V12RE3 engine, the transport crate, and the rusted tow truck as the original hidden transport artifact. Pending authentication, title review, and escrow, Mason read the offer 3 times. Owen sat beside him on the curb near the service lane, spinning the chrome lug nut keychain slowly. "Dad," he whispered. "Is that enough to fix the shop?" Mason let out a breath that almost became a laugh. "Yes." And the old tow truck. Mason looked at the red truck, ugly and heroic under the event lights. "The truck goes with the engine if the museum takes it. It is part of the story." Owen nodded, then frowned. "Will we still remember it?" Mason put an arm around his shoulders. "We will remember it better than anyone." The next day brought lawyers, appraisers, and paperwork. Mason did not sign anything without counsel. Lydia provided the service log and entry confirmation. The farm estate bill of sale was reviewed and found valid. Frank signed a witness statement about the transport modification. Ray recorded a statement identifying the crate, the designation, and the E3 history. Helena's exclusive negotiation did not collapse entirely, but it moved out of her control. The museum consortium required an independent review, and the Voss name was no longer the center of the story. For Helena, that was a consequence money could not quickly repair. A week later, Mason stood in Cole Roadside and Repair after closing, looking at the empty space where the rusted tow truck had once parked. The museum had taken it on a covered transporter that afternoon. Not as junk, not as a hazard, but as a protected artifact. Mason had kept a certified copy of the bill of sale, a photograph of the truck at the service lane, and a replica of the E3 plate Ray had arranged for Owen. The shop lease was paid. The old broken tow rig had been replaced with a reliable used truck. The office heater was fixed. Owen's school account was current. None of it looked glamorous, but every paid bill felt like air returning to a room. Owen stood by the office hook, holding the chrome lug nut keychain. "Dad," he asked, "why did Mr. Danner respect the truck when Ms. Voss laughed at it?" Mason leaned against the workbench and thought carefully. He could have said because Ray knew more. He could have said because Helena was arrogant. Both were true, but neither was enough. Because Ray asked what it carried. Mason said, "She only asked how it looked." Owen turned the keychain in his fingers. "Is that why you look at old things so long?" Mason smiled softly. "Partly. And because of Mom," the question landed gently and still hurt. Mason looked toward the framed photograph of Grace near the office shelf. "Your mom believed old things deserved one honest look." Owen clipped the chrome lug nut keychain onto the hook beside the office door. The little piece of metal caught the evening light, bright against the worn wall. "Then we should keep looking," he said. Mason reached out and rested a hand on his son's shoulder. "Yes," he said. "We should." For a while, they stood together in the quiet shop, listening to the sounds most people never noticed: the tick of cooling metal, the hum of new lights, the distant traffic beyond the bay door, the steady breathing of a place that had survived another hard season. Mason did not become a different man after the money. He still answered roadside calls. He still wiped grease from his hands before signing school forms. He still taught Owen how to hold a flashlight steady and how to listen before touching a machine. But something had changed. The people who came into Cole Roadside and Repair no longer looked at the worn floor and small office as proof that Mason was ordinary. Some came because of the story. Some came because Ray Danner mentioned him in an interview. Some came because they had old machines nobody else wanted to inspect. Mason took them one at a time. Months later, a large photograph arrived from the museum. It showed the rusted red tow truck under careful lights, the hidden bed compartment open. The Falcon V12RE3 crate displayed exactly as it had been found. A small plaque underneath credited Mason and Owen Cole for preserving the discovery. Mason hung a copy in the shop, not in the front window, but near the office hook where Owen's keychain still rested after school. When Owen saw it, he smiled and touched the little chrome lug nut. "Rust is not the whole story," he said. Mason looked at his son, then at the photo, then at the open bay door where another old vehicle was waiting for someone patient enough to listen. "No," he said. "It never was."